So moving forward with the Friend app, in this video we're going to finish off the database class that we started 2 videos ago. Okay, so I'm going to just open Project again, and I'm going to go back to the Friends database. Actually, it's already up here on the screen. I'm just going to click on that, double click it to open it up. Now let's finish off this, because we started this a few videos ago, and I mentioned that the reason we're getting those errors is because we haven't implemented a couple of abstract methods. Just to be clear, abstract methods are methods that are meant for being for you to override. In this example, you could see that it would make sense for us to have a function to override the onCreate database, because of course a function that's created by Android has got no idea of the table names, the database name, column names that you would want for your particular database, essentially. So that's why they enable you to override it, so that you can put that functionality in, while still having a lot of other functionality built in. So let's go in there and have a look. So to do that, we want to have a look at some of the functions that we want to override. So I'm going to type Command N, which is, I believe, Alt Insert on a PC. And we're going to go to our override methods. We'll look at the first one. I've got a list here of lots of them. We're going to look at the onCreate. These are the 2 that we're going to override. So I'm just going to click on both of those now. Now, before we go too much further, just to confirm, if I go back into there and have a look, if we look for onCreate, okay, you'll notice there that's an abstract method. So in other words, it's got no functionality built in. We need to override that, and that's what we're about to do. And likewise for the onUpgrade, that also is in the same boat. That needs to be overridden, and that's what we're going to be doing right now. So firstly, the onCreate. Now what we need to do there is we need to simply add the code that creates our database. So we need to tell it the columns and so forth that we need to use. So the code is going to be db because we've already got a database that's been passed to this method. So all the complexity in terms of figuring out whether the database is open and those types of things is already handled by the SQLite Open Helper class that we've extended from, that we've subclassed from. So we're going to type SQL. The SQL is going to be create space table space plus tables dot friends. So that's the name of the table that we defined. Plus, now we need to add some valid SQL. I'll give it a space here. Plus, firstly we need to add a base column. The base columns dot ID plus, we need to do the definition now. So we're going to call that an integer. We're going to call it our primary key. That's our primary sort of identifier for this field. We're going to use something called auto increment. Now what auto increment does, it does as it sounds like it does, it creates a number, then each time a record is saved it auto increments it. So starting off, it'll be the first record that is saved in the table will be the number 1. We'll have the number 1 assigned for that value. The next one will be number 2, 3, 4 and so on. The advantage of that is we're not having to create any code to do that, to sort of read the list of the next number to use or anything like that. SQLite is doing that automatically, so it's going in there and figuring out the next number to use. So it's just a quick way to create a unique number to make sure that this record is going to be unique. So that's the first field, is the base columns. Next we need to add our 3 other fields from our friends columns. So we can type in plus friends columns dot friends name plus, and the type of data was of course text. We're going to put not null, which means that we have to have some data in there, and SQLite will complain if there's not any data in there. And we'll do the same for the other 2, plus friends contract.friends columns, either way, dot friends email plus text not null. Make sure you're putting those spaces in there as well. If you don't put spaces, like for example, if I didn't put a space in there, we'd actually get an error creating, and that's because the line would read friend's name, the friend's name field, and there's no space between that and text for the type of the variable type for that SQL data, and that would be invalid SQL. So make sure you're putting those spaces in, as you can see on the screen, and then we finish it off plus friends columns dot friends, and of course it's phone, and just for simplicity we're going to make that a text as well, not null. And because we're on the last line now, we don't have a comma. You only put a comma when there's another field following it. Where you can finish this off, we can just put a a right bracket, close off the quote, and put a right bracket to close off the db.exec SQL command. And that's our first line. We've created a table. That's literally all we need to do for this entire function, because we've only got the one table. And if you had more tables in here, more tables I should say, you would update them in here. You would add extra exec SQL lines to do that. But in this case, we've only got just the one table, so it's quite simple. So next we come to on upgrade. Now you might be wondering, we talked earlier and I mentioned that I would be telling you about this. What are these version numbers? Well, I think the best thing that we can do to explain this before we talk about too much for is just refer back to a couple of slides so you can understand what the potential problem here is with databases and versions. So one of the questions you might be asking is, well, why not just supply a database that's already set up? So we've gone through this, these commands to create the table, adding code. Can't we just create a database and save that into the relevant sort of subfolder and then unpack it so that the user has got the database pre-set up, so we don't have to write all this SQL command code to create databases? Well, look, there's two big reasons why that won't work. Firstly, the user can clear data. If you've used an Android device before, you're probably aware that there's a facility where you can quite easily clear all the user data from a particular application. So if we supplied a pre-created database, if the user happened to do that, and delete it, because essentially that of clearing data deletes all data for that particular app, it means our database would get deleted, rendering the app worthless because it would crash not being able to find the database, and they would have to physically delete the entire app and reinstall it to fix the problem. So clearly we can't supply it for that reason alone. But there's also another important reason, and that's with upgrades. Now your app is probably going to evolve over time, and it's likely that you'll issue new versions with bug fixes and maybe new functionality. So you probably want to allow the user to upgrade gracefully to the new version without deleting any of their existing data, right? So just to clarify, in this scenario, I just want to point out what the potential problem could be. Let's assume that each user on the screen has come along at that relevant time and installed your app. So let's say you installed version 1 of an app, and back then, with your contact system, you only had two fields. You had a name and a phone number. So user 1 came along and installed your database with version 1. You then decided, look, it'd be great to come out with a new version, version 2, and you wanted to add an email field to the database. So user 2 comes along and installs it, and he's got no problems because, of course, he hasn't seen version 1 of the app, so he gets the 3 fields. Now, let's say version 3 comes out and you've decided I also want to record the Skype address as well. So you can see now that database is expanded now to 4 fields. User 3 comes along and he's okay because he's got the 4 versions and he hasn't used any previous versions. So any user who installs your latest version from scratch isn't going to have a problem. But in the case of user 1 and user 2, they are going to have problems if they install version 3 of the application, because version 3 assumes that there's an email address and a Skype address. And of course, looking back at their databases, in the case of user 1, he's got no email field, he or she, or Skype address, and version 2 hasn't got a Skype address. So what we need to do is build in some logic to make sure that anyone who's using our app, irrespective of the version that they're using, can be upgraded to the appropriate version, which that happens automatically with Google Play, but our database needs to be upgraded. So in other words, in the case of the first user 1, we need to somehow add the email field and also the Skype fields to the SQLite, to his or her SQLite database. And likewise for version 2, the user 2 who's on version 2, we need to add the Skype address. So that's the reason why we need to upgrade databases, and I hope that's made it a little bit more clearer. Okay, so that's the reason why we need to have the facility to upgrade. So the way that this works, this is a function that Android were aware of, and the SQLite Open Helper does a lot of the work for us because it will automatically test that for us. So we've got a function here, our second method that we overrode called onUpgrade, and the parameters it takes is the database, the old version, and the new version. So it's got a couple of parameters. So if we have a look at that, let's write a little bit of code here just so it makes it a bit more clearer. So we're going to type int version equals old version. So in other words, the version that the person is running at this point in time is sent automatically as the old version. Again, this happens automatically from within Android. So we could put a bit of code in there. We could put if version equals 1, add some extra fields to the database without deleting existing data. And presumably at the end of that we got it fixed, so we then type version equals 2, which means we've upgraded successfully to version 2. So that's the end of that test. And then we'd put in the next line, if version is not equal to database underscore version, it means there's probably some other issue. So again, database version, that's the current version of our app. So each time you deployed an app to the Google Play App Store, you would increment this database version. So again, this is the reason why I've pretended to start from number 2, because I've assumed that we've had a previous version that was version 1. Really what I'm saying is the on-upgrade method isn't an issue until you've got the second version of your app. For the first version, it's always going to be the latest version. There's only going to be one version. You don't have to think about upgrading the database. As soon as you release the second upgrade, that's when you need to do it. So we're simulating some of that code in here just to show you what you would do. Now what we'll do here is we'll put a worst case scenario and we'll just put some code to delete the tables if for some reason there was a problem. Now, this would also be useful if you've got a particular type of app that doesn't need to save the data, but you might want to just sort of store some stats or something that can be recreated each time you upgrade. If that's the case, you can still use the on-upgrade. You can drop the existing database, delete it in other words, and recreate it to make sure you've got the latest copy. So just to be clear, the on-create method, that would always contain the code to create the latest version of the tables, all the tables. So it's got all the fields that would be needed would be put in there. So let's have a look at this test. Okay, so to do that, we could type db.execSQL drop table if exists plus tables friends, so the name of the table, and you do that for all the tables in your application. Then of course the last thing you do is you do uncreate db. We want to do that to make sure that it recreates the tables for the latest version. So that's it. So that's really upgrading, and it'll make more sense once you've created a few versions yourself. Just to be clear again, the code in the onCreate is the code to create the latest version of your app's SQLite database. You might be wondering, well, where's the previous versions? Well, the previous versions that create code for those versions would already be in the previous version of the app. So again, don't worry yourself too much about it. It's not something you need to worry. You need to know a lot about right now, but it is very useful down the track. And this is one of the great features of this SQLite Open Helper, that it does a lot of this code for us. And we don't have to do anything. We can just pass the parameters and it goes through and does the rest. It does all the checking, and we just put a little bit of code in here, and it's upgraded automatically. Okay, just to finish off the database code, the last thing we need to do now is we need to create a delete database method. Public static void delete database. We're going to accept a context. And the command's quite simple. It's context.delete database. And of course, the database will be database name on the top of the file. Okay, so that's the database code finished. In the next video, we're going to move on and start work on the content provider code.